The morning sun hit the glass walls of the tallest building in New York City. At the very top floor, Alexander Reed stood looking down at the tiny people and cars below. Everything looked so small from up here, just like the problems of ordinary folks seemed small to him these days. Alex, as nobody dared to call him anymore, straightened his expensive tie and checked his watch. Another day, another $1 million. At 42, he had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. His company, Reed Technologies, was worth billions. People whispered when he walked by. Business magazines put his face on their covers. He had everything, except someone to share it with. His phone buzzed. His assistant reminded him about the board meeting in 5 minutes. Alex sighed. These meetings all felt the same now. People nodded at whatever he said, too scared to disagree with the boss. He couldn't remember the last time someone had honestly told him no. "Mr. Reed, they're waiting for you," said his assistant from the doorway. The meeting room fell silent when he walked in. 12 people in expensive suits sat up straighter. Alex barely noticed them anymore. He sat down and opened the presentation about quarterly profits. "We're up 28%, said the finance guy, smiling too widely. The new software launch exceeded all expectations. Alex nodded but didn't really hear the words. Success used to feel good. Now it just felt empty. When had making money become so boring? Back in his office, Alex popped 2 pills for his headache. They had become a daily habit. His doctor had warned him about stress, but what did that old man know about running a global company? Still, the chest pains last week had scared him more than he wanted to admit. His private elevator took him down to the garage where his driver waited with the Bentley. "Home, sir." Home. The word made Alex almost laugh. His home was a penthouse that cost more than some small countries' yearly budgets. It had 5 bedrooms, 7 bathrooms, and a view that tourists paid to see. But most nights, he just sat alone with a glass of scotch, watching the city lights below. That night, the pain in his chest came back worse than before. It felt like someone was squeezing his heart. His vision blurred. In a moment of fear, he called his driver to take him to the hospital. The emergency room didn't care that he was Alexander Reed. He waited like everyone else, clutching his chest and wondering if this was how billionaires died, in plastic chairs under fluorescent lights. 4 hours later, a doctor finally looked him over. After some tests, she sat down next to his bed with a serious face. "Mr. Reed, physically, there's nothing wrong with your heart. That's impossible. The pain is most likely stress and anxiety," she said, looking at him over her glasses. "When was the last time you took a vacation?" Alex had to think about it. Maybe 7 years ago. The doctor shook her head. "Your body is telling you to slow down. Listen to it, or next time, it won't be just a warning." Back at his penthouse, Alex couldn't sleep. The doctor's words kept playing in his mind. His phone rang at 3 a.m. Only one person would call at this hour, his assistant. "Sorry to disturb you, sir. I heard about the hospital. I've taken the liberty of planning something for your health situation. I don't need." "Sir, with all due respect, you do. I've arranged for you to spend 1 month in a small town called Maplewood. Your company is looking at building a data center there. You can personally oversee the initial stages while getting the rest your doctor ordered." Alex wanted to fire her on the spot, but a strange feeling stopped him. Maybe it was the leftover fear from the hospital, or maybe it was the realization that his empty penthouse felt more like a prison than a home. "Fine," he said finally. 1 week, not a month. 3 weeks minimum, sir. I've already rescheduled your meetings." For the first time in years, someone had told him no. Oddly enough, it felt refreshing. 3 days later, Alex found himself driving a rented luxury car toward a dot on the map called Maplewood, wondering what he had gotten himself into. Little did he know, this small town was about to change everything he thought he knew about life, success, and what really matters. Alexander's shiny black car looked completely out of place on Maplewood's main street. People actually stopped to stare as he drove by. An old man walking his dog shook his head. 2 teenagers pointed and whispered. Alex felt like an alien that had just landed on the wrong planet. "This was a mistake," he muttered, adjusting his designer sunglasses. The GPS on his phone kept cutting out, and there wasn't a decent coffee shop in sight. Just diners and small stores with handmade signs. He finally found the inn his assistant had booked. It was an old Victorian house with a wraparound porch and a swing. No doorman, no valet parking, just a small parking lot with gravel that crunched under his Italian leather shoes. "You must be Mr. Reed," said an older woman at the front desk. Her silver hair was tied back, and she wore a cardigan despite the warm weather. "I'm Rose, the owner. We've been expecting you." Alex nodded, already checking his phone for messages. "My luggage." "Oh, we don't have bellhops here, dear. Your room is up those stairs, first door on the right. Breakfast is from 7 to 9. He looked up, surprised. "No room service?" Rose smiled kindly. "This isn't that kind of place, but there's a mini fridge in your room and a shared kitchen downstairs if you get hungry." The room was quaint. That was the polite word for it. Small bed, faded wallpaper, and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. Nothing like his penthouse with its marble floors and rain showers. "I'll have to cut this trip short," he decided, pulling out his phone to call his assistant. No signal. He moved to the window. One bar, then none. After an hour of trying to get a decent connection, Alex gave up and decided to drive around town to find a better spot. Maybe he could find somewhere to work peacefully for a few days before heading back to civilization. He was driving down a country road when his expensive car made a strange noise and started to slow down. Smoke rose from under the hood. Great, just great. Alex pulled over and got out, careful not to get dirt on his pants. He stared at the car, unsure what to do. In New York, he would have called his driver. Out here in the middle of nowhere, he felt helpless. A pickup truck slowed down and pulled over. A woman in overalls and a flannel shirt got out, wiping her hands on a rag. "Car trouble?" she asked, walking over. Alex straightened up. "Obviously. Do you know of a luxury car service around here?" The woman laughed. It was a real laugh, not the polite chuckles he was used to hearing at business functions. "Luxury car service? In Maplewood? You're not from around here, are you?" "No, I'm not," he said stiffly. "I'm just visiting. Unfortunately." She raised an eyebrow and looked at his car. "Pop the hood." "Excuse me." "The hood of the car. Pop it open so I can take a look." Alex hesitated, then reached in and pulled the lever. The woman leaned over the engine, examining it with knowledgeable eyes. "Your cooling system's busted. You're not going anywhere in this today." "That's unacceptable. I have important business." "Your business will have to wait," she said simply. "I'm Kate, by the way. I run the vet clinic in town, but I also fix cars sometimes." "Alexander Reed," he said, expecting some recognition. There was none. "Well, Alexander Reed, I can call Tom's Towing for you, and he can take your car to his shop. It'll be a couple days at least." "A couple days?" Alex was horrified. "Can't they rush it?" Kate shook her head. "Things move at their own pace here. I can give you a ride back to town if you'd like." With no other option, Alex found himself climbing into Kate's dusty pickup truck. Old coffee cups and dog toys littered the floor. Country music played softly on the radio. "So," Kate said as they drove, "what brings a big city guy like you to our little town?" "Business. My company is considering building a data center here." "Oh, you're that guy?" Kate's voice cooled. "The one planning to build on the old Miller property near the creek. Is there a problem with that?" "Only if you care about the local wildlife water supply and the people who've lived here for generations." Alex stiffened. "My company creates jobs and opportunities." "At what cost?" Kate asked. She didn't wait for an answer as they pulled into town. "Some things are worth more than money, Alexander Reed. Something tells me you might learn that while you're stuck here with us simple folk." As she dropped him off at the inn, Alex realized something strange. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to him as if his money didn't matter. And oddly enough, it was the most refreshing thing he'd felt in a long, long time. After 3 days in Maplewood, Alexander was going crazy. His car was still in the shop. The internet at the inn barely worked. And he'd worn the same 3 outfits because the local store didn't sell designer clothes. "There's a town meeting tonight," Rose told him at breakfast, "about that data center your company wants to build." Alex perked up. Finally, something business-related. "What time?" 7 o'clock at the community center. Everyone will be there." The community center turned out to be an old building with wooden floors that creaked and walls covered with children's artwork. Folding chairs were set up in rows, most already filled with locals. Alex slipped into a seat in the back, feeling strangely underdressed in what he considered casual clothes, a button-down shirt that cost more than most people's entire outfits. Mayor Jenkins, a round man with a friendly face, called the meeting to order. As you all know, Reed Technologies is considering our town for their new data center. Tonight, we'll discuss what this means for Maplewood. Alex sat up straighter, ready to hear praise for his company's investment in their small town. Instead, the first speaker was Kate, the woman who'd helped with his car. This proposed data center would sit right next to Willow Creek, Kate said, pointing to a map. That creek provides water for local farms and is home to several endangered species. The construction alone could damage the ecosystem, not to mention the millions of gallons of water they'll use for cooling their servers. Alex frowned. She was exaggerating. His company followed environmental regulations. Technically. We need jobs, argued a man in the front row. My son had to move away because there's no work here. But at what cost? Kate countered. Once the building is done, how many locals will actually get hired? These tech companies bring in their own people. Alex couldn't stay silent anymore. He stood up. Excuse me. I'm Alexander Reed, CEO of Reed Technologies. The room went silent. All eyes turned to him. Our company creates opportunities. Yes, we'll use local resources, but we'll pay well for them. And we do hire locally for many positions. Kate crossed her arms. And the environmental impact. We follow all regulations, Alex said stiffly. The bare minimum required by law, Kate challenged. That's not the same as actually caring about this community. The debate went back and forth. For the first time in years, Alex couldn't simply throw money at a problem to make it disappear. These people challenged him, questioned him. It was uncomfortable, but strangely refreshing. As the meeting ended with no clear resolution, dark clouds gathered outside. By the time people started leaving, rain poured down in sheets. Flash flood warning, someone shouted, checking their phone. The river's rising fast. Kate immediately took charge. Anyone near Oak Street or River Road needs to evacuate now. We need sandbags at the community center and the school. Mayor Jenkins nodded. I'll call the emergency team. He looked at Alex. Mr. Reed, you might want to head back to the inn. It's on higher ground. Alex nodded and started to leave, but something stopped him. Outside, he watched as the townspeople organized themselves with impressive efficiency. Even elderly people came out in raincoats, ready to help. Kate was directing a group filling sandbags. Her hair was plastered to her face from the rain, but she kept working. What can I do? Alex found himself asking before he could stop himself. Kate looked surprised. You want to help? Yes. The word felt strange in his mouth. Grab those empty bags and start filling, she instructed, pointing to a pile of burlap sacks. Alex stared at the pile of sand. He hadn't done physical labor since, well, ever. But he rolled up his sleeves, his very expensive sleeves, and got to work. Hours later, his back ached, his hands were blistered, and his clothes were ruined. But the makeshift barriers held against the rising water. Homes that might have been flooded were saved. Not bad for a corporate suit, Kate said, handing him a cup of coffee as they took a break under an awning. I'm more than just a suit, Alex said, surprised by how much he wanted her to believe that. Maybe, Kate said, with the hint of a smile. Maybe you are. As they looked out at the town they'd helped protect, something shifted inside Alex. For the first time in years, he felt like he'd done something real, something that mattered. And it had nothing to do with money at all. The town meeting, he said suddenly. I want to hear more about your concerns with the data center. Kate looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. Really? You actually want to listen? Yes, said Alex, and the strangest thing was, he meant it. A week turned into 2, and Alexander still hadn't left Maplewood. His car was fixed, but he found reasons to stay. Just checking on the data center plans, he told his assistant when she called, concerned about his extended absence. The truth was more complicated. For the first time in years, Alex was sleeping through the night. No pills, no waking up at 3 a.m. with his mind racing. The The fresh air and quiet seemed to be healing something inside him he hadn't realized was broken. One morning, he was having breakfast at the local diner when Kate walked in. She spotted him and, after a moment's hesitation, came over. "Mind if I join you? It's crowded today." Alex gestured to the empty seat across from him. "Be my guest." The waitress brought Kate coffee without being asked. "The usual, honey." "Thanks, Deb," Kate said with a smile. Alex watched this exchange with curiosity. "You come here often?" "Almost every morning. It's on my way to the clinic." Kate stirred sugar into her coffee. "Speaking of which, what happened to you rushing back to your important business?" Alex shrugged. "I'm still working. Just remotely." Kate studied him over her mug. "You look different." "Different how?" "Less uptight. You're not wearing a tie, for starters." Alex looked down at his casual button-down. He couldn't remember the last time he'd gone this long without wearing a suit. It's practical. When in Rome, and all that. Kate's food arrived, simple eggs and toast. As she ate, she checked her watch. "I need to get going soon. We've got a busy day at the clinic." "What kind of animals do you treat?" Alex found himself asking, genuinely curious. "Everything from pet hamsters to farm horses." Kate's eyes lit up when she talked about her work. "Today we're doing vaccine clinics for local farmers' livestock." An idea struck Alex. Could I come see?" Kate nearly choked on her toast. "You want to visit a veterinary clinic. Why?" Alex wasn't entirely sure himself. "I've been thinking about what you said at the town meeting. About understanding the community before making business decisions. Maybe seeing your work would help me understand what matters here." Kate considered him for a long moment. "All right, but you'll need different shoes. Those fancy loafers won't last 5 minutes on a farm." That's how Alexander Reed, CEO worth billions, found himself at the local general store buying his first pair of work boots and jeans. Hours later, he stood in a barn watching Kate vaccinate a cow. She moved with calm efficiency, speaking softly to the animal. "Want to help?" she asked, gesturing him closer. "I don't know anything about animals," Alex admitted. "Just hold her head steady, like this." Kate demonstrated and then guided his hands to the right position. The cow's eyes were large and surprisingly gentle. Alex felt the animal's warmth, its steady breathing. Something about the simple connection to another living thing moved him unexpectedly. After the clinic, Kate drove them to a hillside overlooking the town. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "This is my favorite spot," Kate said, sitting on the hood of her truck. "When work gets overwhelming, I come here to remember why I do what I do." Alex sat beside her, taking in the view. Below them lay Maplewood, its lights beginning to twinkle as darkness fell. Beyond it stretched farmland, forests, and the winding creek. "It's beautiful," he said simply. "This is what you're not seeing when you look at maps and surveys for your data center," Kate said quietly. "This is what we're trying to protect." "I used to want to be a doctor," Alex said suddenly, surprising himself with the admission. "Before business school, before Reed Technologies, I wanted to help people." Kate turned to look at him. "What happened?" "My father happened. Doctors work for people like us, they don't become people like us," he said. "So I followed the family path. Business, expansion, profit. And now you run one of the biggest tech companies in the world." "Yes." Alex stared at the horizon. "But some days I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd followed my own path." "It's never too late, you know," Kate said, "to change direction." Alex looked at her, this woman who lived by her own rules and seemed genuinely happy. When was the last time he felt truly happy? "Maybe you're right," he said softly. As they sat in comfortable silence watching the stars appear, Alexander felt something unfamiliar bubbling up inside him, not ambition or pride or the drive to succeed, but something simpler and more powerful. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he felt hope. 3 weeks into his stay, Alexander barely recognized his own reflection. His face had tanned from days spent outdoors. His usually clean-shaven jaw now sported a short beard. Most shocking of all was the smile that came more easily now. His phone rang constantly with messages from New York. His company needed decisions, his board was getting restless, and his assistant sounded increasingly worried. But for the first time in his adult life, Alexander wasn't putting work first. "You've gone native," Kate teased one afternoon as they walked through the town's small farmers market. Alex was carrying a paper bag filled with fresh bread and local honey. "Hardly," he scoffed, but without any real bite. "I still check my emails." "Only about 50 times a day instead of 100. Kate picked up an apple, examining it before adding it to her basket. Progress. They had fallen into an easy friendship over the past weeks. Kate showed him the maplewood that tourists never saw, the secret swimming hole beyond the old mill, the best pie at Mrs. Wilson's kitchen, not the diner, the breathtaking view from Hawks Ridge at sunrise. In return, Alex found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone, about growing up lonely in a massive house, about his father's cold ambition, about the emptiness of success when you have no one to share it with. "There's Mr. Thompson," Kate said, nodding toward an elderly man struggling with a heavy bag of feed. "His farm's been having trouble since his hip surgery." Before Alex could think twice, he was walking over. "Let me help you with that, sir." The old farmer looked surprised but grateful. "Much obliged, young man." As Alex loaded the feed into Mr. Thompson's truck, he learned about the small dairy farm that had been in the family for generations, now threatened by rising costs and the old man's health problems. "My son tried to keep it going," Mr. Thompson said, "but had to take a job in the city to support his kids. Comes back on weekends to help, but it's not enough." Walking back to Kate, Alex felt troubled. His farm might fail. It's happening all over. Small farms can't compete with big agricultural corporations. Kate sighed. "That's another reason people here are suspicious of your data center. They've seen big companies come in before, make promises, and leave nothing but problems behind." Alex was quiet the rest of the afternoon, thinking. That evening, as they shared dinner at the local pizza place, Kate got a phone call that made her face go pale. "It's my dad," she said, hanging up. "He's in the hospital. Heart attack." Without hesitation, Alex grabbed his car keys. "I'll drive you." The local hospital was small and understaffed. Kate's father, a rugged man in his 60s who shared her straight-talking manner, lay pale against white sheets. "It's not as bad as last time," he insisted, though the monitors and tubes told a different story. Kate stepped outside to speak with the doctor, leaving Alex alone with her father. "So you're the big city fella my Katie's been showing around," the older man said, studying Alex. "Yes, sir. Your daughter's been very educational." Kate's father laughed, then winced. "That sounds like her. Never could stop teaching people, even as a little girl." His face grew serious. "They want to transfer me to the big hospital in the city. Better cardiac unit, but insurance won't cover most of it." Alex nodded, an idea forming. When Kate returned, looking worried, he stepped out to make a call. In the hallway, he made several calls actually. To his assistant, to his personal doctor in New York, to the chief of cardiology at the best heart hospital in the state. 3 hours later, a helicopter landed outside the small hospital. 2 specialists emerged. "What's happening?" Kate asked, confused. "Your father is being transferred to Northeast Heart Center," Alex explained. "Their cardiac team is waiting." Kate's eyes widened. "But how?" "The insurance." "It's taken care of," Alex said simply. Her eyes narrowed. "I don't want your charity." "It's not charity," Alex said firmly. "It's friendship. Would you let a friend help if they could?" Kate looked at him for a long moment, seeing past the billionaire to the man beneath. Finally, she nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, and did something she'd never done before. She hugged him. That night, sitting in a private waiting room of the state's best hospital, while Kate slept in a chair, exhausted from worry, Alex had a realization. All his wealth and power had never given him the feeling he had right now of having done something truly meaningful for someone who mattered. His phone buzzed with an urgent message from his CFO about the quarterly earnings call tomorrow. For the first time ever, Alexander Reed ignored it completely and felt not a trace of guilt. The peaceful bubble Alexander had been living in for nearly a month burst on a Tuesday morning. He was helping Kate at the clinic, wearing jeans and work boots that now felt more comfortable than his Italian suits, when 3 black SUVs pulled up outside. "Boss!" A sharp voice cut through the quiet clinic. Alex looked up to see his CFO, Richard, standing in the doorway in a pristine suit, looking horrified at the sight of his billionaire CEO holding a puppy while a child petted it. "Richard, what are you doing here?" Alex kept his voice steady, though his heart raced. "What am I doing here? What are you doing here?" Richard gestured wildly. "You've gone dark for weeks. The board is in panic mode. The Miller deal is falling apart. And you're playing with dogs." Kate stepped forward. "I'll take over, Alex." She gently took the puppy, giving him a look that said this was his problem to handle. Outside, Alex found not just Richard but his entire executive team, 5 people who collectively ran one of the world's largest tech companies, all standing awkwardly on the gravel parking lot of a small-town vet clinic. "This is an intervention," said Lisa, his chief legal officer. "We need you back in New York. Today." "There's a hostile takeover brewing," Richard added, lowering his voice. "Jenkins Tech sees you're distracted, and they're making moves." Alex felt like he was being doused with cold water. The real world, his world, was crashing back in. "Fine, let's talk." He led them to the diner, the only place in town with a table big enough for all of them. The locals stared as the group of suits filed in, looking comically out of place among the checkered tablecloths. For 2 hours, they updated him on the company crisis. The data center project was just one small piece of a much larger problem. His absence had been interpreted as weakness. Competitors were circling. Investors were nervous. "And there's more," Richard said, sliding a folder across the table. "The preliminary environmental impact report on the Maplewood site." Alex opened it, scanning the contents. His stomach dropped. The report confirmed what Kate had been saying all along. The data center, as currently designed, would significantly damage the local watershed and ecosystem. "We can bury this," Richard said quietly. "Paid for a new report. Find experts who'll say what we want." 5 weeks ago, Alex would have nodded and moved on. Business as usual. But now, Kate's face flashed in his mind. Mr. Thompson's struggling farm. The whole town coming together during the flood. "No," Alex said firmly. "We're not burying anything." Richard laughed nervously. "It was just a suggestion, boss. What's the plan then?" Before Alex could answer, the diner door opened and Kate walked in. She froze when she saw the table of executives, but then her eyes found the report in Alex's hands. He could see the moment she understood what it was. The hurt and betrayal on her face cut him to the core. "Kate, I can explain," he started, standing up. "Don't bother," she said, her voice ice cold. "I was actually coming to thank you. The hospital called. My dad's surgery went well." She shook her head. "I guess I was wrong about you changing." She turned and walked out. Alex moved to follow her, but Richard grabbed his arm. "Boss, we need to leave for the airport now if we're going to make the board meeting tomorrow." Alex stood frozen between 2 worlds. The corporate empire he built and the simple life that had begun to heal his soul. "Go," he finally said to his team. "Take the company jet back. I'll follow tomorrow." "But the board." "Tell them I'll be there. I just need to fix something first." After they reluctantly left, Alex drove to Kate's house, but she wouldn't answer the door. He tried the clinic, closed early. Even Rose at the inn just shook her head. "Give her time," the older woman advised. That night, alone in his room, Alex stared at the environmental report again. Then he did something he'd never done before. He called the head of his engineering team directly. "I need a complete redesign of the Maplewood data center," he said without preamble. "Completely green. Zero environmental impact. Cost is no object." "Sir, that would eat into our profit margin significantly." "I don't care," Alex cut him off. "Make it happen." Then he booked a commercial flight to New York for the morning. It was time to face the board and himself. Alexander stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, looking out at the New York skyline. After weeks in Maplewood, the city felt overwhelming. Too loud, too busy, too cold. His expensive furniture and art pieces seemed like they belonged to a stranger. The board meeting had gone exactly as expected. When he presented his plan to completely redesign the data center to be environmentally friendly, regardless of cost, there had been outrage. "This isn't a charity," the chairman had thundered. "We have shareholders to answer to." And communities we affect, Alex had replied calmly. I won't build something that destroys what makes Maplewood special. Since when do you care about some backwater town? Richard had asked, genuinely confused. Since I learned there are things money can't buy, Alex had thought but hadn't said. The battle had raged for hours. In the end, Alex had used the one weapon they couldn't fight against, his controlling interest in the company. He'd founded Re Technologies, and despite going public, he'd maintained enough shares to have the final say. The data center will be green, or it won't be built at all, he'd said finally. And there are other changes coming too. Now, 3 days later, he was preparing for the press conference that would announce Re Technologies' new direction, a commitment to sustainable development, community partnership, and using technology to solve problems, not create them. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant, car waiting downstairs. Alex straightened his tie, the first time he'd worn one in weeks, and headed out. The press room was packed. Cameras flashed as he took the podium. For a moment, he felt a flutter of panic. Then he thought of Kate's face when she talked about protecting what mattered. He took a deep breath and began. For 15 years, Re Technologies has focused on growth at any cost. Today, that changes. He looked directly into the cameras. I'm announcing a fundamental shift in how we operate. From now on, environmental and community impact will be given equal weight to profit in all our decisions. The room erupted with questions. Alex held up his hand. We're starting with the Maplewood project, completely redesigning our data center to have zero negative environmental impact. Yes, this will cost more. Yes, this will reduce our profit margins. And yes, this is just the beginning. As expected, the company's stock took an immediate hit. Financial analysts predicted doom. Competitors circled, sensing weakness. But something unexpected happened too. Letters and emails poured in from people around the world, thanking him for taking a stand. Other companies began announcing similar initiatives, not wanting to be left behind. 2 weeks after the press conference, Alexander packed a small bag and did something he'd never done before. He drove himself to his destination instead of taking the corporate jet. The journey gave him time to think about what he really wanted. His car, a modest hybrid instead of a luxury sedan, pulled into Maplewood just as the sun was setting. The town looked exactly the same, yet everything felt different. He drove straight to Kate's clinic. The lights were still on, though the closed sign hung on the door. Taking a deep breath, he knocked. Kate opened the door, surprise flickering across her face. You're back. I am. Alex stood awkwardly, suddenly unsure what to say. I saw your dad's name in the thank you notes at the hospital. He's doing better. Much better. Kate studied him. I heard about your press conference. It was all over the news even here. I meant every word. I know. She hesitated, then stepped back to let him in. I may have judged you too quickly that day. Rose showed me the new plans for the data center after you left. They're actually impressive. Alex smiled. I had a good teacher about what really matters. They sat in her small office, catching up. Kate told him about her father's recovery, about the new volunteer program at the clinic. Alex told her about the changes at his company, the resistance and the surprising support. So what now? Kate finally asked. You're the big city billionaire. Maplewood's a small pond for someone like you. Maybe I'm tired of big ponds, Alex said quietly. I bought Mr. Thompson's farm. He gets to stay on and run it, but with proper funding, new equipment. Kate's eyes widened. You bought a farm? You. I also bought that empty building on Main Street. I'm thinking of turning the top floor into a small office. Re Technologies' first rural headquarters. You're staying? Kate couldn't hide her surprise. Not full-time, at least not yet. I still have a company to run, but I'd like to spend more time here. He met her eyes. If that's okay with the locals. Kate's slow smile was worth more than all the money in his bank accounts. I think the locals might warm up to the idea, eventually. As they walked out into the cool evening air, Alex looked up at the stars, so much brighter here than in New York, and felt something he hadn't felt in decades. He felt like he was exactly where he belonged.